cheesecake, the mitzvah of eating cheesecake on Shavuot. Where does it come from? On Shavuot, we celebrate Matan Torah, the revelation, the giving of Torah at Sinai. You know, with the mitzvot like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not kidnap, honor your parents, all of those, but truly central to our observance of this festival, a test of piety, the mitzvah of eating cheesecake on Shavuot. Where does it come from? The earliest early reference to the practice of eating dairy on Shavuot goes back to the 14th century in Sefer HaMinhagim. But it's not until a bit later that we have an explanation of where that practice comes from. The Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, in the 16th century, in his gloss on the Shulchan Aruch, it's Orach Chaim 494-3, writes, "It is the practice in all places to eat dairy foods on the first day of Shavuot, and it appears to me that the reason is that it is like the two dishes that are taken on the night of Pesach in remembrance of the Pesach offering and remembrance of the festival offering, I guess your shank bone and egg perhaps. So we eat dairy foods and afterwards meat foods. And we need to bring them with two breads on the table, which is in place of the altar. And in this, there is a remembrance of the two breads that were offered on Yom HaBikurim, Shavuot, in the temple." Well, that's his explanation. The Magen Avraham, Rabbi Avraham Combiner in the 17th century, explains that in saying this: milk. There are many reasons, and I found written this reason in the Zohar, that those 7 weeks from Pesach to Shavuot, those 7 weeks were for Israel 7 clean, like a woman who is purified from her nidah, her menstrual cycle. And it is known that blood coagulates and becomes milk. And we have the attribute of compassion. And a custom of our ancestors, a custom, a minhag that is Torah. But we must be cautious not to thereby violate a prohibition, and one does not have to wait between milk and meat, if one has not eaten hard cheese. Well, that's his explanation. The milk, okay, milk produced by a mammal, I guess it gets in there somehow through the blood, and somehow it's a sign of purity and life and compassion. So milk is a sign of compassion. Okay, and we must be careful. Okay, that's his explanation. He says this though, like the two dishes, that is to say, just as on Pesach, we make a remembrance of the sacrifice, so too on Shavuot. 2 sacrifices on Pesach, 2 on Shavuot. So 2 breads, 2 dishes, 1 dairy, 1 meat. He says further, it is forbidden to eat meat and milk with 1 bread, with 1 challah. And so it was the practice to bake it with butter. So then certainly they will need to bring another loaf to eat with meat. So a meal or a series of meals, 1 dairy and 1 meat, and baking dairy into the bread to make sure it doesn't get eaten with the meat, which is normally a big no-no today. Don't make chalavi, don't make dairy bread, because you don't want it to get mixed up with the meat. So how do you do that? Well, dairy bread is a little bit of bread and lots of dairy on top, like thick, creamy cream cheese with sugar in it, perhaps. Maybe it sounds like a pizza. Make it so it's clearly dairy so no one could ever think it's to be eaten with meat. Well, the Chok Yaakov wrote, and he's writing, this is, you know him as the Shavuot Yaakov, he's writing around 1700. He says, it is written in the Kolbo that they also would eat milk and honey on Shavuot because the Torah, which is what we get on Shavuot, the Torah is compared to milk and honey, as it is written, milk and honey under your tongue. And they practice in all Israel to put zifron in a cake, and the reason is that it gladdens the heart. Also, the women would make on Shavuot a long bread with 4 heads, and apparently we can say the custom was in remembrance of the 2 breads offered on the festival, or because of the constellation of the twins that is present in Sivan. Okay, it sounds like he's not exactly sure where the custom comes from, but that's his explanation. The Aruch HaShulchan, writing on the same question, first he cites the Ramah, which we quoted, and then he says, and also, so another reason, and also because by way of the giving of the Torah, they were raised upward and transformed from the impurity of Mitzrayim to the purity of the holy. Therefore, we eat milk, which comes from blood, as they say. Blood coagulates and becomes milk. And there is in this a hint that the judgment is transformed to mercy. And also it is the practice to put parkum, saffron, in their foods and dishes because it gladdens, and therefore for there is in it a good odor. Okay, so sounds like we're not quite sure why we're doing this. We have lots of possible reasons. The Der Hetev, writing more recently, he writes milk. First he cites the Magen Avraham. He says, and I heard that we eat milk and afterward meat, not like what the messengers or angels did visiting Avraham, who ate meat with milk. That because of this, the Torah was given Israel. So in that explanation, early in the Torah, when the visitors come to Avraham and Sarah, and they tell them about the wonderful birth coming, and Avraham and Sarah serve them milk and meat. They serve them together, it seems here. So we know not to do that. We have the Torah, so we know how to eat. If you eat milk, and then only after that you can eat the milk, meat. And this from Mishnah Berurah now. He explains it here, and this is just 100 years ago. He says dairy foods, see Magen Avraham. We heard that explanation. But he writes further. He says, and I heard further in the name of one Gadol, who said the real reason is that when they stood on Mount Sinai and received the Torah, for the 10 Commandments were revealed to them, and along with it, all of the sections of the Torah, as Rav Saadia Gaon wrote, with the 10 Commandments were included all the Torah. So they're on Mount Sinai, and they came down from the mount to their houses. They did not find anything ready to eat except dairy foods, for meat needs great preparation to slaughter with the sharp knife, as God commanded, to remove the veins and fat and soak it and salt it and cook it in new utensils, or the utensils that they had from before that they cooked them in that time, were now forbidden to them. That is to say, when they got the Torah, they discovered the details of kashrut. They didn't have any kosher meat or kosher utensils ready, so all they had to eat was dairy. So they chose for themselves, according to the need of the moment, dairy products. And we do the same in remembrance of this. That's one story. Even more modern, and yet another explanation from Rabbi Chaim Halevi Donin, written way, way back in 1972, and these are all common era dates. He wrote, the custom of eating dairy food on Shavuot. He says, special foods or dishes characteristic of certain festivals are often a result of some religious symbolism. Thus, it has become customary on Shavuot to eat at least one dairy meal during the holiday. Some see this as symbolizing a land flowing with milk and honey. Others see it as emphasizing on this festival, which marks the giving of the Torah, the interdependence and unity of the written and oral Torah. For the very same verses that speak of bringing the choicest fruits of the land unto the house of the Lord your God in celebration of Shavuot, also stress that you must not boil a kid in its mother's milk. On the basis of the latter part of these verses, the oral Torah based its prohibition of eating meat and milk together. Hence, a separate dairy meal is deliberately eaten to emphasize the unity of the verse and the authenticity of the oral Torah. We eat it that way to show that you can do it and how to do it, and to reflect a passage just that describes just how it's done in the Torah. And even more, slightly more recent, from 1979, Rabbi Isaac Klein, in our conservative movement, he writes on the eating of dairy dishes. It is customary to eat dairy dishes on the first day of Shavuot. Many reasons have been given for the custom. One derives it from the verse, honey and milk shall be under your tongue, Song of Songs, which is made to refer to the Torah, implying that the words of the Torah are as pleasant and acceptable to our ears and hearts as milk and honey are to our tongues. It has also been suggested that just as we have two food items, shank bone and the egg, at the Seder to represent the two sacrificial offerings brought to the temple on Pesach, so on Shavuot we have two types of food, first milk and later meat, in commemoration of the two special sacrificial offerings that were brought on Shavuot. We must mention one more reason, which is still taken seriously by many, though it seems almost facetious. With the giving of the Torah, the dietary laws were established. Hence, when the people came home from Sinai, they could not eat meat because they had none that was prepared properly. To prepare new meat properly would take too long. They had no choice, therefore, but to eat milk dishes. He says further, it's Rabbi Isaac Klein, a more logical reason, which may be an afterthought, however, connects the custom of eating dairy with the restraint and self-control the Torah is gained by eschewing pleasures and excesses. Meat is the food of those who know no restraint. Ascetics and people who seek self-control usually limit themselves to dairy foods. Eating dairy dishes on Shavuot is a reminder that the Torah is given to him who lives the sober life rather than that of pleasure. And here he quotes Hershkovitz in Otzar Kol Minhagei Yeshurun. He says, that is Rabbi Isaac Klein. Dairy, we have dairy on Shavuot. How do we get to cheesecake? Well, we saw that reference of baking the dairy bread. So not quite, could be pizza, but it could be cheesecake. And our practice now, out of our deep and sincere piety, we have combined two practices of Shavuot. One is staying up late to study Torah, and the other of eating dairy. The ideal way, and for some, the only way you can combine these mitzvot, is simply to stay up all night eating cheesecake. However you do it, and whatever kind of cheesecake you eat, and if you're of the opinion that blintzes count, which some might, it's considered a legitimate opinion. However you observe Shavuot, I hope this year it will be an especially and as happy as it possibly can be. Chag Sameach. Happy Shavuot.